guys, just a quick note about today's episode. I recorded it as one long take and it ended up being over an hour long. So I decided to split this episode into two. But since I had not planned on doing that, there's kind of no official stopping point. So I've just split it up and you'll hear me come back at the end of the episode, let you know to look forward to next week's. But just know you'll get the rest of the content in part 2 next week. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the M is for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. And on today's show, I want to talk about the number one age group that I get questions about, the number one age group that I think causes the most grief and the most questioning and the most soul searching for practically any parent out there. And that is toddlers. Now, maybe you're in a season with teenagers and you thought I was going to say teenagers. Maybe you have a brand new little baby and you thought I was going to say newborns. Maybe you're just entering the preteen years and you think nothing can be quite as flummoxing as this moment where my child is on the cusp of young adulthood and the hormones are starting to rage and things are getting really dicey. And I agree that there are specific and unique challenges to every stage that our kids go through. However, if I'm going to get a question about a particular age group, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be toddlers. Why is that? I think it is because there is such an incredible mix of infuriating insanity and endearing cuteness that is so jumbled up together that it both tugs at our heartstrings and mushes our brain to pulp. And you're like, how is it that this particular stage is able to make me feel so many feelings of adoration and enjoyment and love for this tiny, cute creature with their lisp and their dimples on their elbows and their curls and their chubby thighs, and also feeling like I could put my head through a wall because they're just so unreasonable, so just maddening. And it's that strange dichotomy of undeniable cuteness and crazy making that make them a unique and uniquely frustrating age to parent. Now, I am on my 9th and 10th toddlers right now. That would be my 2.5-year-old twins, Titus and Toby. And they are delightful. And they are also a lot of work. And they are also not my hardest toddlers. Now, there are days when they shoot off in different directions and I'm trying to get dinner done and there's stuff underfoot and someone's asking me a question about work that they have to turn in for their homeschool co-op the next day, and I have an email in the back of my mind that I need to send, and the laundry needs to be flipped upstairs, that it does feel like they are my hardest children in that moment. And by hard, y'all know that I often say the phrase, hard is not the same thing as bad. Simply acknowledging that something is hard does not mean that you think it's a negative thing in your life. It can be a really positive thing that pushes you towards growth and helps you appreciate what you come away with. But you can still say, you know what? This is not a season of ease. This is not a season of coasting by any stretch, and not mean that you hate the season that you're in, and not mean even that you're wishing it away. And I will say that that is probably the number one sentiment that I hear from parents, is that they wish that they could just get through this stage. They could get through the toddler stage and then they could be moving on to a time when their kids can magically buckle themselves in their car seats without any help. They can wipe their own rears. They can make their own cereal in the morning. They can put their own shoes on and tie them without melting down into torrents of tears. And I get it. I absolutely can relate so strongly to that idea. In fact, just the other day, because I have had a toddler in my house for the last 16 years, ever since my firstborn turned 1. And so I know what it feels like to constantly have that underlying assumption that there's going to be a meltdown at some point during the day, that nap times are the anchor for the soul for that day. I know Jesus is the anchor for our souls, but you know what I mean, that's what's going to get us through, and that's what I'm looking forward to that day. But at the same time, I also know, and you're going to hate me for saying this because any seasoned mom that says this, the young moms always roll their eyes, but it's so true, that the time is fleeting. And I know that wishing that time away never serves us well. It never means that we come out with a better understanding necessarily of what we've been through, but only maybe just relief. And so I really want to encourage you as you're in the toddler season, as you are approaching it possibly, or even as you are grandparenting a toddler, because I know that not all of my listeners are young moms or moms my age even that have young toddlers, that if you can look at toddlers as a crucible, as a way of refining yourself that Jesus is using to kind of turn up the heat on the character qualities that need refining that are already inside of you, because nothing that a toddler does can reveal to us anything that wasn't already there. All it's going to do is show us something that was deep down in our hearts that gets bubbled to the surface and scraped off by the Holy Spirit in the process of the refining experience that is parenting a toddler. So I encourage you to lean into that. And I'm going to give you some practical tips for what that looks like. But I started to say I had this thought because I've had a toddler in my house for about 16 years. And that is that Titus and Toby are 2.5 now. They are in the full-on toddler phase, and yet they won't be here for so much longer because I feel like my life is going at warp speed. And in a year or so, when they are really no longer considered toddlers, year and a half from now, if I do not have any more children and we leave that up to the Lord, and if Lord willing, He gives us more children, then we are willing and happy to accept them. But if that doesn't happen, then I might be out of this phase forever. And I had 2 reactions to that thought. One was a sense of profound relief. Like I said, there is an element of mental bracing that happens the entire time that you have a toddler in your house. You understand that when you wake them up in the morning, they might be furious with you, or they might be angelic. They might be hysterical, or they might be cheerful and calm. You don't quite ever know what you're going to get. So you kind of have to be prepared for all eventualities. And it keeps you constantly on your toes, which is not a bad thing, but it also keeps you in this mental state of tension. And it's kind of stressful to think that you have to be mentally prepared at all times for whatever it is that they might throw at you, whether it's emotional or literally something that they throw at you. Anybody else gotten a Lego in their forehead before? So my thought, and I felt a little bit guilty about it at first, was one of, oh my goodness, what if I were past nap times and a lot of my schedule revolving around those? What if I were past meltdowns? What if I were past bottom wiping in the next several years? That would be kind of a mental sigh of relief in my brain. And I'm just being really vulnerable and transparent with you to admit that, because I'm the girl that's saying the season is worth pushing through. It's worth gleaning from. The Lord is refining you. It is good for you to be in this hard season. But having been in it just over and over again with a new toddler every couple of years for 16 years, and not ever having let myself get to a place where it occurred to me that it could ever end. Yes, hypothetically, I'm aware that I won't always have a toddler of my own in my house. I assume that I will be a grandmother someday soon-ish, and that I will have toddlers again in my house. But there's a huge difference, as everyone well knows, between being in complete responsible possession of that toddler at all times and being able to send them home to mama and daddy. So that thought kind of sprouted in my mind and was honestly a new one for me. And we'll see what the Lord does. But then the other thought was, but I would never again experience chubby arms around my neck and hear someone say, "Wovu mama," and hold my cheeks in their little hands to give me a sloppy kiss with peanut butter all over it. And I would never again hear the funny little ways that they mispronounce words. And I know from experience of expressing this never again concept that I will immediately have people shoot back at me. You're going to have a million grandkids. You're going to experience this again. But I do think that as much as I hear that grandkids are wonderful, there is a difference between that special bond that you have with your own children and, yes, the very special bond that you will share with your grandchildren. And so I had this twinge of sadness at the thought that I might never experience that again with a new little human being if the Lord doesn't see fit to give us any more children. So that's kind of just where I am personally in this journey. I've been in it for the long haul. I don't know that I'm done with it yet, but I can relate and commiserate with pretty much anything that you could throw at me. I have been there. I have experienced it. And I am in it, not just with my 2.5-year-old toddlers, which I mentioned to you are not the hardest toddlers that I have actually encountered during my mothering journey. They are full of energy. They have meltdowns just like any other toddler, but they are pretty pliable. They're fairly compliant. They're fairly happy to stop doing whatever it is that's making everybody crazy. And they're very snuggly. They're very content to be held. So if you can just distract them and cuddle them a little bit, they'll usually let go of whatever it is they were fixated on, because as we all know, toddlers are fixators, and that's part of the problem. And that is something that I will address here in a little bit in terms of how we can help them to get past those fixations and to have a little bit broader perspective, because understandably, little kids have tunnel vision. They have their blinders on, and whatever is in front of them is what they want. Whatever the object of their affection is the only thing that will satisfy the desires of their heart. And so we have to part of our job as parents is to widen their perspective as they get a little bit older, and to show them that there are other options, and that melting down over that particular little thing is not going to serve them or anybody else. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But I want to rewind and give you some perspective on some of my hardest toddlers, since the ones that I'm currently parenting are not admittedly as challenging as some have been. So let's start with my firstborn. If you've read Emma's for Mama, then you know that he was the one that drove us crazy with his potty training, or lack thereof, for a full year. That I sat on the floor with him for an hour at a time trying to get him to go potty, that he was completely resistant. And by the way, I tell this story with his full blessing, both in the book and on the podcast. He's aware that this is an object lesson that people need to hear, and that I am so grateful for the amazing young man that he's becoming, that he's been for the last several years. I am so grateful for the preteen that he was. I'm so grateful for the elementary student that he was. I'm even grateful for the toddler that he was, even though he was really, really, really challenging. And it was one of the most stressful years of my life to have this little boy who would not just do a basic bodily function, and who was angry all the time because he wouldn't do it, because it made him upset and made him feel bad. And he needed everybody else around him to feel that way too. But to know that this little toddler that took me to the edge of my wits and felt like I was going to be pushed over it is now the young man that edits these podcasts. That is such a joy to talk to. That is so responsible and kind and mature and considerate of others. To know that hanging in there, I always say Galatians 6:9, not growing weary of doing good. To know that not growing weary of doing good actually got me to this point. By God's grace, absolutely by God's grace, to be able to say that he is one of my favorite human beings on the planet. Hi, Ezra. And that he is such a joy to mother at this point, that I just want to give you that perspective, that we were in a year of building our first DIY house. Sean and I have built a couple of houses together. He does most of the work, but I do a lot of sourcing of the materials. Obviously, I'm holding down the fort at home. I'm making meals. I'm homeschooling. I'm wiping bottoms. I'm parenting. And a lot of that is solo parenting, because he is busy building the houses when we're kind of in the middle of that venture. And we've done it twice. And the first time with 2 small children was actually more stressful than when we did it when we had 7 children, just because the circumstances were a little different. He was working really long hours. There's a whole other podcast to be had in there, but I will say, throw in a toddler that refuses to potty train normally and is a crank and a half 6 out of 7 days a week until he actually finally chooses to go or can't hold it in any longer. And I felt, I talk about that mental kind of tension that's always in the back of your mind of, how am I going to get through today without so many meltdowns that we all lose it? That was constantly in the back of my mind for at least a full year with our firstborn. And then our secondborn was mischievous and cuddly and fun. And he gave some other people a run for their money, but he and I were just always buds. Like, I don't mean that in the sense that I wasn't mothering him, that I wasn't his mama. I wasn't just his friend by any stretch when he was a toddler, but he just had this more easygoing way about him as a toddler. That can change through different stages, by the way, that made it where the Lord kind of gave me some relief after that first really hard season of 2 to 3 with my firstborn, Ezra. And then along came Della, my thirdborn, and she is the quintessential peacemaking, cheerful, always happy, calm, even-keeled. Yeah, everybody loves her. It is so easy to love Della because she is just chill. And she was that way when she was a toddler. Very brief little spell where she got a little snitty, but for the most part, chill. And then along come Evie and Nola. Those are our numbers 4 and 5. They are our identical twin girls who are 10 years old now. And they were pretty easy as babies. They were, and I've had people beg me to tell this story and to give them some hope, either because they have multiples and they feel like they'll never make it through because they're in that really hard multiple stage of toddlerdom, or because they just have toddlers in general and they've heard that Evie and Nola were a handful and a half, a double handful, and then more. And so I'll tell you at least a brief version of that now. So they were pretty easy as babies, believe it or not. I basically mothered them and took care of them like I did my singletons, except for I did everything twice, but basically one after the other, or sometimes at the same time if I was tandem feeding them. And they were sweet-natured. They slept really well together. They took good naps. They ate things that they were supposed to eat. They just quote did what they were supposed to do. They were my easiest potty trainers at 2.5. They kind of made it a contest. Well, if she's going to get an M&M, then I'm going to get an M&M. And they were potty trained in about a week. They never regressed. And I mean, just kind of a dream baby to early toddler situation as far as multiples go, because it could have been obviously a lot more challenging to have two that are melting down and losing their minds all the time. And I have to say that this detail sticks in my mind because it made the situation so much more pressurized. But I don't think it really has anything to do with anything. But my husband took a somewhat extended trip to Canada with his father and brother, and my girls lost their minds. I don't know why it was that week. I don't know why it had to happen the way that it did. They were about 2 3/4 years, 2 years, 8 months. And that week they went from fairly easygoing to caring about everything so much. And that's probably something you relate to if you're a parent of a toddler. They have strong feelings about everything. They have strong feelings about the gum that they dropped on the floor. They have strong feelings about which spoon they use. They have strong feelings about buttoning their own shirts that they're completely incapable of actually buttoning. They have strong feelings about the way you brush their hair. They have strong feelings about bath time. Everything is kind of at a 10 with many toddlers. Not all. Again, Della was not at a 10. She stayed in pretty even-keeled 5, but I've had a lot that stayed at a 9 or a 10 over things that seemed so trivial. But try explaining to a toddler that the fact that there is ketchup on their knee is not the end of the world, and tell me how that goes for you. So Evie and Nola went from, they would have a meltdown or two. They had opinions about things to having opinions about everything. From 2 and 8 months until fully 4 years old, they had sensory issues. They hated having their poofy skirts buckled into car seats, and yet they hated not wearing poofy skirts just as much. So you kind of had to pick your poison. You were either going to have to drag a screaming child to the car because she didn't get to wear a poofy skirt, or you were going to have a screaming child in the car because her poofy skirt got smushed by the car seat buckle. Somewhere in there, I think, yes, by the time they kind of started their descent into madness, I had my 6th child, who was Theo, and the way that our Honda Odyssey, which every seat was taken by a car seat or a bottom, the way that our Honda Odyssey was oriented, we had Theo right between the two girls. And I think somewhere in there we upgraded to, by upgraded, I mean a used car, but it was more space, to a Nissan NV 3500 12-passenger van. But it was still the same setup, and that was that Theo's infant car seat was in the center between their two 5-point harness car seats on either side. And I genuinely was concerned that he would have hearing loss from the longevity and the decibel level, just ear-splitting screaming that happened in that car each day that I went to the gym. At that point, I was teaching at the gym 5 days a week, and I brought all 5 of my kids, six of my kids with me. And every single car seat ride was a meltdown. Every single time we got them dressed was a meltdown. Every single meal time was a meltdown. We got so good at chanting and distracting and trying to get their minds off the fact that they were in the car again. So I felt like I was in kind of a buildup to that car seat ride almost every single day, knowing that there was going to be brain obliterating screaming, that we were all going to be working so hard to distract them. And you may ask, well, why in the world did you put yourself in the car 5 days a week? Why did you teach these classes? Well, I was a homeschool mom with 6 kids at home with me all day. And the twins, while the car seats were their nemesis, were also melting down over things at home. They also changed their clothes 5 to 15 times a day, unless I specifically followed them around locked doors and physically kept them from doing it. Now, obviously they were with me a lot. I was physically following them around a lot, but it's amazing how quickly two little 2.5, 3-year-olds can run off while you're mixing up some muffins and change clothes. Like they weren't doing anything dangerous, but it was just a constant strain on my brain to think of how to keep them from doing this thing that was stealing my sanity. Even though it seems like such a small thing, it just ate at me to have to constantly be picking up, folding, and putting back these clothes. So that was another fun little thing. And then they would lock each other in headlocks and just screech as they pulled each other's hair. They weren't defiant so much as they were just a bundle of emotions and nerves that were so raw that the least poke sent them into histrionics. So I did not give up teaching that class because that was my hour of sanctuary 5 days a week. And though I got screamed at on the way there, on the way home, though the kids and I had to work really hard to distract them and calm them down, which I think honestly was probably great practice for them in how to diffuse overwrought emotions and how to exercise your own self-control and calm even when those around you aren't calm. So I think probably I'm grateful for that experience for them in some ways, even though we all kind of rolled our eyes at each other like, there go the twins again. But I can remember distinctly at certain times getting into the garage, getting everybody out of the car, coming back to get groceries, and then just sitting there in the seat with my head against the window because it was cold. You know, let's say this was in November and the window pane was cold and everything on me just felt like it was pulsating with just pent up, overwrought, crazy mama syndrome. And I'm guessing you know exactly what that is if you have a toddler in your home and it's one of those challenging types. Since then, the one right after them had a really hard phase from ages 3 to 5 where he got angry over almost everything. Almost everything. The wrinkles in his pants, the, again, car seat buckles could send him off, the ties on his shoes, the color of his food. Actually, you know what? I shouldn't demean his character that way. Theo, my number 6, who had rage monster issues from 3 to 5, has always been a fantastic eater. And Evie and Nola went from eating pretty well when they were little bitty to having to be coaxed into taking even the smallest bite of chicken and bread and yummy mashed potatoes. That was another fun wrinkle in the twins are really, really, really hard phase that we went through. And it wasn't just that twins are really hard. All toddlers have the potential to be really hard. But when there's 2 of them and you feel like you're getting screamed at in stereo and there's really not a break because if one is doing well, the other one is usually losing their minds. Man, it's a whole different ballgame. I can't even imagine triplets or quadruplets. I imagine that would be next level over the top, big leagues hard. So Theo struggled with rage monster issues that we helped him work through for a couple of years. And then we now have a fun little Spitfire who's not quite a toddler anymore, but he has been our most defiant child to date. The first thing out of his mouth, almost as a reflex, is no. And that's not something that I have dealt with a ton because we work with our children from very young ages to mirror back to us what we have asked them to do. So, so-and-so, I need you to go potty. Yes, mama, or yes, ma'am. What do you need to do? I need to go potty. Yes, ma'am. And so there's something that I call a verbal contract with your child. And so I'll just jump in here to some practical things that can help you as you parent toddlers. And I'll circle back around to some of the things that I mentioned earlier. But as you parent toddlers, one of the best things that you can do is make sure that you get down on their level. Get down with level eye contact so that you're not just pointing your finger at them and shaking it and talking down at them. Make sure that they can hear you. Try to keep your voice and demeanor as calm as possible. You can be authoritative without having to raise your voice or scream at anybody or sound harsh and mean. You can just use your voice with authority and calm to talk to a toddler. Now you may be thinking, oh, sure you can, Abby. You just talked about how crazy your girls were for a really long time. Absolutely. I spent more time doubting all the things that I thought I knew about parenting, the clear communication of expectations, the letting them know what the consequence will be if they don't follow through, the motivation, the talking to the heart of it, the following through, the consistency, the love, and the discipline all together that I have been working on with my first 3 kids so much and seeing fruit of already. I started to doubt myself with those toddler twins who took me for such a roller coaster ride. But at the same time, I could tell that bit by bit, week by week, we were inching towards sanity. And part of that was because they were getting older and more mature naturally. And part of that was because of the consistency and the repetition and the follow through, just like it had been with the other ones, but it took longer and it was more intense. And there was more of a pressure cooker effect with them where I could feel my temper rising. I could feel my emotions starting to veer out of control. And it became so clear to me that really, I was going to have to cling to Jesus by my fingernails if I was going to make it through this. Now, make it through it we did. And I want to tell you before I go back to any other practical suggestions that my 10-year-old twin girls are 2 of the most delightful people that I've ever met. And you may be thinking, you just told me that your firstborn is one of the most delightful people you know. Yeah, I actually really like my kids. Now, some of them challenge me more than others. Some of them I feel more kindly towards at certain times of the day and seasons than others because I am human and my emotions can tell me this is frustrating, I don't like it, and therefore I don't really like the little human behind it sometimes. And I have to remind myself that regardless of what my emotions tell me, the truth is that I have been given their hearts to nurture. I have been given their hearts to shepherd well, and that it doesn't matter what my feelings tell me in that exact moment. I have to keep going and I have to keep going well. And that does not mean that I always do well, but it means that I always have the same goal, that I'm always striving in Christ's strength toward the same thing, and that I can always repent and ask for forgiveness and walk away from that behavior toward something that is more productive, more helpful to my child, and more God-honoring. So I want to say that even though you may think, well, if these practical measures are coming from someone who has dealt with children who have struggled with things for years, maybe that means they didn't work, that I firmly do believe that fruit came both in my life and my children's lives from not giving up in these circumstances, from not growing weary of doing good. And I am starting to see the harvest. And like I said, my 10-year-old twin girls are some of the most generous. They can be emotional. I think that's part of what I saw in them when they were little, is that they have very tender hearts. They feel things deeply. They are extremely empathetic. They are quicker to tears than some of my other children, but it's no longer wild histrionics. Instead, it is controlled and it's loving. And I think I will see that become more and more prominent as they get older and as they get even more mature and gain more self-control, and the fruit of the Spirit is born out in their lives. So I want to encourage you, instead of discourage you that, hey, I had to go through these tough seasons sometimes for 18 months, 2 years, 2.5 years, that hanging in there does bear fruit, and that those kids can look completely different in 5, 6, 7 years than they did in their hardest stages. And you see, like I said, I see those glimmers of who they were as toddlers, but it's been refined and it's been trained and it's been directed in good paths. And I see that it has good aspects where sometimes it felt like it was just all emotion and all raw feelings and all fits and meltdowns. In fact, another friend of mine recently, when I was talking to her about my little defiant child with whom we are battling daily right now, she said, well, you mentioned that Theo was kind of like that when he was younger. And I was thinking, oh, sort of. And she said, but you would never, ever, ever know that about him now. Like, he seems like the sweetest child. And I thought about it and I realized Theo at 8 years old is cheerful. He is happy to help. He is very sweet to his younger siblings. He is he's kind of one of my shyer children, but he is enjoyable little chatterbox when he gets in a comfortable place where he just wants to talk to you. And he's turning into a truly delightful kid as well. And it's not that I doubted that or hadn't noticed, but to hear that perspective from another friend to say, I remember when you told me about the struggles you were having, and I don't see any of those anymore. Look at what the Lord has done. Sometimes we need to be reminded as mamas to look at what the Lord has done and rejoice in that, not boast in our parenting, but boast in our weakness that the Lord has overcome with his goodness. All right, friends, thank you for joining me for part 1 of this really fun topic, toddlers. And we're going to be wrapping it up next week in part 2. So make sure you come back for the rest of the show. If you guys enjoyed today's program, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and share with others. And if you're looking for more daily content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, you can follow along on Instagram at m.is.or.mama.